but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
All right, folks, before we get started, we're going to ask if you are at a table with someone that you walked in with, would one of you stand up from that table and go join a table? We like to mix the crowd a little bit, and we think that we may be sitting with folks we know. So if you haven't made a new friend yet today, would you go to a table where you can make a new friend?
Just going to ask people to fill tables so there's a robust conversation at each table. So if you see spaces, fill them up. Thank you. Just make sure you have a good critical mass at your table. And wave your hands if you want more company. Great. Welcome, everybody. I am really thrilled to see such great turnout the week before spring break. And I'm grateful because I know it's a really hectic week for everybody. I want to also say hello to our far-flung friends and alumni online, on the web, out in the ether. Welcome. I want to begin this conversation the way we've begun the last ones by asking you to put on all of the hats that you wear. So I'm going to ask for first hands to go up who are people who learn at William & Mary, have been a student, are currently a student, may someday be a student, because you never know what degrees we're going to generate, right? So hands up if you've been a learner or will be a learner at William & Mary. Wonderful. Okay, if you're somebody who has taught, is teaching now, or will teach, hopes to teach, hands up, please. Let's keep them, well, that's fine, we'll keep doing it. If you are a member of the community more broadly around the university, in any of the localities in town and in this region, someone who lives here nearby, right? Okay. I know we have at least one board member, so we're not assuming that everybody's putting their hands up, although Richmond could be counted as nearby. We'll welcome board members in just a second. Somebody who supports or pursues research, the generation of new knowledge at William & Mary, and is a partner in that. Somebody who supports any of these operations that we've talked about in one way or another at William & Mary, or hopes to in the future. Okay. My hand would be going up on all of those things because I'm still learning, and I'm always thinking of it myself as a teacher here, and hopefully by next year I'll get a chance to actually teach a class. That is one hope after we finish the campaign. So thank you for those different hats that you wear. Thank you for bringing them all into this room and thinking along those different dimensions. I also want to note that over the course of these meetings, we've had folks who are leaders in local government. I don't see any right now, but it's been great to have them, including in our last session. We have board members. If you wave if you're a board member of the Board of Visitors, thank you so much. It means a lot to have you in the room listening to the conversations, the push and pull of ideas and perspectives. And we have human beings who have helped shape this process. I want to thank Jeremy Martin, who's here, wave. And members of the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, if you're here, would you wave? Members of Cabinet, if you're here, would you wave? Who've been thinking about process all the way along, thank you. And then Peggy Gurris can't be here because she's in the middle of recruiting new leadership for our dean searches, but I am subbing for her in that capacity, and we need to thank her for helping to continue to shape the process as we go forward. So we're at a key inflection moment. I've been saying that in blogs and in email and in person for a while. This is a moment when we're looking at the results of an external scan. The charge to the Strategic Planning Steering Committee and to its subcommittees was to identify the dominant trends coming our way over the next decade or so, decade or more, and identify them, opportunities, significant challenges, and put them in front of mind for this institution as we begin to develop strategy going forward. And I'll say a little bit in a moment about what I mean by strategy. But so we had those scans in white papers, and what we've done is ask the community, every unit, every department, to process them, engage with them, engage, if you could, with the materials that they amassed as part of their scan, their interviews, and their data gathering, and then respond to that. And we've done our best in a really short time to digest the highlights of those responses. There were 43 briefs that came into us, 45 more. Thank you, 45 that came into us over the last couple of weeks. And we're really, really grateful for the time that you took in processing those briefs. And what we've asked are, where are there substantial areas of agreement? Where are there substantial areas of disagreement? It will shock you to know that we disagree as an academic institution. And then where are there omissions, things that we should have put forward as dominant trends or challenges or opportunities facing us? So that's what we're here to talk about today. For about 60 minutes, we're going to spend our time very briefly on areas of agreement and a much more extended way on areas of disagreement and omissions, and ask you to work on them as a table. Then we're going to spend about 30 minutes on a digest of what we're calling framing assumptions, starting places around which we think we need to build strategy. And we want you to vet those framing assumptions with us and for us. And that vetting will go back to the Strategic Planning Committee and to Cabinet. So thank you for the work The work here is going to be quite active, and it's going to be substantive, and it's going to be going back to the groups that are charged with using those framing assumptions, finalizing them, and then beginning to develop some strategy. So that's the plan for today. And we will off and on be turning on and off audio so that the room can talk to itself as we work. But we're also inviting folks who are here with us on the live stream to continue to do that work as well. And we've got links for you that I'll gesture to as we go. So just really, oops, that's not what I expected. Okay, it's always user error. Not enough IT people in the room, I can tell, or there would have been more giggling at that one. So here's what we want to do today. Really focus in on phase 2 feedback, those 3 areas I talked to you about, and then the shift to phase 3, which is a draft of framing assumptions that we're going to be working with as we develop strategy. I'll remind you that we have 2 dominant goals for the plan. You've seen this a gazillion times, so I won't spend time on it. And 2 process goals that we've put in front of you multiple times and been designing this process towards. And here's where we are at March 4th in our planning process. All of this is available online. So quick just recap of the phase that we've been, environmental analysis, and let me move now to the areas of pretty clear alignment across those 45 briefs of response to our white papers. The first is that idea of the liberal arts and sciences, an institution dedicated to that breadth and range across disciplines and domains of work as the powerful core of this institution going forward. And I will keep saying, as I have, that that idea has more explanatory value now than it has ever had in my career, and it's easier to make the case for than it ever has been in my career. We can drill down on that if that's helpful. The second is some core cherished principles that the Teaching and Learning White Paper outlines: experiential learning, close partnerships between faculty and students that take the expression often in a dominant way of undergraduate engagement in research. Those remain really powerful distinguishers for William and Mary in our sector and will continue to be, given the trends that we see ahead of us. The second is that we need to continue to think through diversity and inclusion as areas of strength, as every sector of society is doing. That we want to position ourselves as a preeminent public research university that makes the breadth and range of the liberal arts and sciences with professional schools a strength. And that we will need to continue to invest in signature areas of excellence to enhance our identity. Finally, we face some challenges with organizational infrastructure. There was a high degree of agreement in the briefs responding to our white papers on what we seek in that infrastructure. Lots of ideas about where we should be going and where we're not there, but a high degree of agreement on what we're seeking. A high degree of agreement on extending our reach beyond the campus, in the country, nationally, in the region, and globally, and on the importance of telling our story more powerfully and more broadly. That comes up over and over again in the white papers and then in the briefs in response. And then also high degree of agreement on the tension between being really efficient with your time and seeking to make those strong individual, personal contacts that we see as a hallmark of this community. So felt across all of the briefs in response a real strong sense of that tension. So we wanted to register it as an area of agreement, although it's also an area of challenge. So I want to go next to areas of disagreement. And we have on the tables, right, you can pull out a nice folder that outlines them really clearly. And what we'd like to ask the tables to do before we come back in plenary is to spend just about 10 minutes working through your sense of the most important areas of disagreement for us to address. So we're starting you with what this community does not agree on, and trying to showcase that, show that to you, share that to you for your sense of the priority of the disagreement and your problem solving. So take about 10 minutes talking them through, reading them and talking them through, and then I'll come back for plenary. have linked that feedback summary to the website, so you can find the link with that feedback summary there and take some time to read it. And we'd love your feedback too. There's a feedback form for those online. somebody that you can tap to report out briefly so that we can hear from as many tables as possible. We have about 15 minutes, and we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 tables. So do the math and see if you can report out where your table landed on the most important area of disagreement that we need to grapple with. And we specifically asked for one because we knew that would make it a harder task. And we wanted to hear what level of agreement or disagreement there is in this room, okay? So got our mics going around, Steve and Jeremy? Who wants to head off with
Who wants to go first?
something they think we need to tackle as an area of disagreement? And let me just ask you to be as brief as you can so we can make sure every table gets to speak.
Our table centered our discussion on the bullet that's about halfway down that says existing strengths should be leveraged rather than diverting support to new startup programs. And the last seconds of our conversation, a comment was made at the table that if new initiatives could grow out of the existing strengths, that would be a good thing.
That's a path of integration between the two really strong opposing positions. You guys had that. How many people landed on that one, just out of curiosity? 1, 2, 3, 4. So, Liz, maybe you could just jump, if we could quickly echo the rationales and whether you also had solutions for that one.
I'm going to let Sarah actually speak.
Sarah, okay, thanks.
I'm Elizabeth, sorry.
It's okay, we have the same name, so it gets confusing. I love the charge to get solutions. We did not get that far in our sticky noting, but we did talk quite a bit about where there are programs that already could be leveraged and that there is a lot of energy to be doing and growing things we already know are going well. And the fear comes from saying that energy won't be put in because the energy will shift to
Got it. Got it.
whatever the new thing
Right.
is.
Transparency.
Well, yes, that's our other sticky note now that I have the microphone.
Great.
That is part of the transparency of the process, that the compression of the strategic planning timeline has led to feelings that we don't actually get to see all the information we need to know where we should be putting our resources or where we should be advocating.
Right. Though you're reading the same thing that the Strategic Planning Steering Committee is reading, right? You've got that all out there. So I don't think there's anything they're reading that's not already posted up, just FYI. It is a ton of work to get through, no question. There's a table back there that wanted to add to the same concern or disagreement.
Spokesperson?
Or over here? Okay.
Who is it? Are we spokesperson?
Oh, I am? Okay.
Same bullet, right?
Yes, we have the same bullet. It was just, yeah, how do we leverage the existing strengths, or do we leverage those, or do we go for the new things, and how does that affect brand is really what our discussion was about. What is our brand, and does it come from one or the other?
Got it.
And then you guys.
I'm just taking some notes, quick.
Did you guys have the same bullet?
We just point out that what happens too often at William & Mary is we do things on a shoestring. And so trying to carry too many initiatives without adequate support for the things that we're doing and doing well is something that really makes us nervous.
So you are speaking for the side that says focus. Okay. There was another set of hands up in the back there.
I'll just give one example from our table and then one way to maybe complicate that bullet a little bit. So the example was something like the call curriculum, which is about 2 bullets below that, and Kate and others at our table were pointing out there are things that are responsive to that don't seem new anymore, but are actually not that old, and are actually still pretty exciting and have opportunities for investment and scaling up. And then I think that led to what is kind of an interesting complication of that bullet is what is new and what is existing. And so what might seem like a brand new initiative could be directionally consistent with a strength, but applied in a new way. Some would see that as a brand new venture, others would see that as actually building on a strength. So I think areas of divergence, we're going to disagree about what constitutes new and what constitutes existing.
Was there another table that was on this one as well? So let me try to play back what I'm hearing right now. One is, this is a real tension. There are some constructive integrative paths forward potentially that involve building on or foregrounding what we're doing. It's going to be incredibly important for our Cabinet and the Strategic Planning Steering Committee to spend time in this place of why we focus, where we're focusing, how we focus, and have we invited enough inputs or ways into those areas of focus so that where it could be that we're building on existing strengths, we're inviting those strengths in. And I'm also hearing, so that goes to the transparency piece of this, taking time with, here are open areas of focus, let's do some calls. I'm also hearing the importance of focus. And I have been hearing that for 18 months, the sense of being stretched thin at this institution. So I do think that the disagreement is coming from that sense of being stretched thin, which is pretty ubiquitous as we look and listen across the institution. Did I play that back fully? Did I miss something? Okay, so we will take that into, there's one hand up here.
So our table talked, as we went through all of these, we didn't land on one, but what we noticed across all of this is there seems to be a tension between two or more different goals in almost each of these items.
Okay.
And what it seems to be is that we're shifting from perhaps collaboration to competition. So it's STEM versus humanities, grad versus undergrad, online versus on campus, new versus existing. And what we talked about is that perhaps what we need to do is be more about our ampersand, that it should be STEM and humanities. These things are integral. We don't need to be setting up a competition. Perhaps it's because we're all tired. Perhaps it's because it's lack of resources. These are not things that are new to any of us, but there seems to be, and maybe it's just the language, but this is something that perhaps we could adjust as we consider some of these challenges going forward.
Okay. I love those systems observations. Thinking like a literary scholar. What can I say? Yeah, psychologist. We'll welcome many disciplines into that mode in the room. But yeah, to see the pattern there, actually, and let's put that forward to Cabinet and the Steering Committee as a pattern itself to try to grapple with, knowing that you can't always get to both things in a solution, but if you look for them, sometimes you can. That's the classic integrative solution, yeah. What tables have not had a chance to report out on what you guys saw as the most significant challenge of disagreement?
So we had near unanimity on the final bullet point. I would say everybody at the table had that one as an area of significant importance. And a little more than half of us found the second bullet point something really compelling, that we need to deal with the issue of non-tenure eligible faculty as partners.
Right.
But had a lot of discussion around the last bullet point, as that's another good example of the versus as opposed to the ampersand.
Right, thank you. We haven't been great in higher ed in coming up with terminology that doesn't cast a whole category of teachers and partners and colleagues in the negative. Kind of need to think about that. Ought to be able to be creative. Steve, yeah.
So we landed on the first one because we saw it kind of redounding throughout some of the other bullet points of the way that the arts and humanities seems to kind of lose a position, which I might kind of rephrase the ampersand as sometimes there seems to be a conflation between some of the things like innovation with only an understanding of innovation as something that STEM does. So kind of the collapsing of technological advancement into the question of innovation that doesn't allow a space for thinking about the forms of innovation that come from humanities, from the arts, from these kind of other ways of approaching our kind of common problems. And the way that we saw that kind of reflected even in the second bullet point right after it was the way of thinking about the activities beyond the traditional classroom. All the examples given are examples much more towards the kind of STEM disciplines, not the outside the classroom form of engagement of things like community engagement or honors theses or things that are kind of hallmarks of the strength of external to the classroom forms of education.
Just a quick clarification, that's really powerful. When we say undergraduate research, is it that that's heard as a STEM activity in this community?
No, I think it's that in the clarification or in the examples given, the examples are almost exclusively from natural sciences or from STEM disciplines. The examples are rarely, if ever, about the student research that take the form of humanities or qualitative forms of engagement.
So we can work to very deliberately ensure that we're inclusive in that terminology. Yeah. I mean, we have, as I understand, 84% of our undergraduates having research experiences with faculty. And my question is, what about the next 16%? How can we ensure that? And we're only going to be able to do that if all of us are engaged in one way or another. All of our disciplines are engaged in the ways that work for that discipline. And they don't always look the same. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Some agreement in our table on 3 and 8. 3 graduate programs received limited attention in the white papers. I would emphasize that as a former graduate dean in arts and sciences myself. So I think that's pretty crucial for the growth of the university as in its attempt to be known for its research excellence. And that fits in nicely with number 8. The quality of student research experiences depends upon sufficient research activity faculty. That means that the university has to invest in a rapidly changing research ecosystem, if I could say that. We have to, our competitors are investing in new research. If we want to get the best students, if we want to get the best grants, we have to have a strategic plan which enables us to support graduate education and the kind of research that will attract the best undergraduates. I think what I would like to see the strategic plan come out with is a definite strategy for accomplishing that. If not, we will not be known for research excellence.
What's so interesting is how much this issue sits both in area of agreement and area of disagreement. That's a puzzle to me. I'm still trying to understand. But I think it's worth noting, and you will have noted it in the way that we've played back. And so you can count on the Strategic Planning Steering Committee and the Cabinet to be grappling pretty directly with this and trying to understand better what's underneath. How many tables have not had a chance to report back out? Just this table? Also this table. Okay, if we could quickly give them space and then we'll shift to the next topic, which is even more juicy. Okay.
So our table in some ways foregrounded the perceived tension between fear of change and or resistance to change and whatever the opposite of that is, like embracing innovation, I guess. And I've been trying to figure out how I wanted to sort of put my finger on this, but I think that the perception that, for example, the faculty are resistant to change is maybe takes us down the wrong path in some ways. I was thinking specifically about the call curriculum, the point here that asks about sort of making sure that we're building on that. And I think the call curriculum, when it arrived, was a bright, shiny object. It invigorated campus. It was, attached to a significant amount of debate and discussion. Then we effectively did quite a bit of very important fundraising around it. But I think that I think the fear on campus, and I'll just speak for myself, isn't the fear of change, it's the fear of moving on to the next thing and forgetting about what you're rooted in. And the
Right.
call curriculum is something that if it's not consistently maintained and invigorated, it becomes stale like all general ed requirements. And so I think that my sense is that when we talk about the creation of new centers, like and I don't mean to single out the Center for Innovation as just an example, it's easy to hear that as a diversion of resources from something that is at the very heart of who we are, which is our call curriculum. And so I think that that tension inheres around the fear of change versus really investing in what we do and making it consistently better.
I will say in this room, I'll just say it, we don't agree on what's the area of investment that enhances the heart of who we are, right? And so that's really what we're starting to grapple with here and that's why we're thinking about what are our framing assumptions for the challenges. But I also hear in what you're saying, Rio, a version of what was right at the beginning, which is what are the paths of investment of time, capital, buildings, space, people, and other resources that get us both, that continue to invigorate what we've already invested in, as well as grow in domains that we haven't, and invite the two to align. And that seems to me a really powerful question of sustainability that the committee is going to have to grapple with, and then come play back again. Yeah, so one more table, yes?
Like our neighbor table, we also focused on the last bullet about the people who are not currently engaged, and is there a way to continue to build trust to tell them that we actually really do want to hear what they have to say, even if they don't currently feel, I think, maybe safe in sharing some information.
Mm-hmm. And that's the topic that you'd like the two committees to really dial down on more fully. Okay. All right, let's put that great set of charges to the committees going forward together. Let's flip the page and look at ideas that the respondents, so we got our 45 white briefs responding to the white papers, saw as omissions. And if you wrote a white paper and your instinct is to say, but we really did write about that, this is not the time to say that. That's okay, and you may have, but we still want to hear what's behind that sense of omission. That's what we're doing today. So we're not dissing your great work. So if you take just about 5 minutes to read those through and then have another conversation at your table about what you think is the highest priority issue here for the Joint Committee to address going forward, that would be great. Thank you. again. And I'm going to just ask if your table actually gave us more than one top, maybe you could just go with one so that other tables can have a shot at the more than one top omission that you want the two committees to be addressing. So anybody ready to bring us in here and make a pitch to push up in the committee's agendas a key omission that you see as critical, given the challenges and opportunities we have ahead?
Dr. Boone?
The key that we looked at focused on the lacking of leadership development and career pathways, but really in terms of embracing the trend in developing flexibility and role definition that would help to break down some of these silos. But looking at how we define faculty, staff, those who cross over and do a little bit of both, those who want to kind of explore different career pathways, which then also helps with retention and helps with breaking down silos. But role definition and embracing more flexibility in roles that make the university kind of run more smoothly.
Okay. Got it. I heard some giggles over here at the ubiquitous word silo. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So we actually centered ours on this language of desiloization and how much that language invites ambiguity, and it's a very kind of promiscuous concept. And on one far end, we have things like the University of Tulsa that destroyed all of its arts and sciences departments in favor of creating pre-professional schools under the language of desilization. On the other hand, we have things like the need to create new communication tracks amongst the ways that we are operating so that we can create new ways of thinking and supporting one another. It's the ambiguity of the term invites all of those, and we see that as kind of a larger problem with how maybe profit-driven language has infiltrated how we think, which allows us to ignore things like staff compensation, the need for health insurance, et cetera, et cetera.
It's really helpful for you to point out that, because when I hear that word silo, what I hear is a metaphor or a trope, and my guess is that it's bridging or standing in for as a shorthand for lots of different things, and we think we're speaking the same shorthand, but we're probably not. And so there's no question, and it's so interesting because it's ubiquitous. It was ubiquitous across the interviews and inputs that the subcommittees pursued. It was ubiquitous in the feedback, in the briefs. And so I think it's actually an incredibly important priority to understand what's meant by that in this community.
And we thought that this also maybe allowed an opportunity for us to think about diversity and inclusion language differently, maybe as an alternative way of articulating these sort of visions that helps us to understand what it is that we mean by these much more promiscuous terms.
Thanks. Were you going to add something from this table, which was also...
You basically said where we landed.
Okay.
It's a trope that's showing up across all three white papers. And while there certainly are areas where we don't communicate as effectively across units as we would like, there are many wonderful activities going on at William & Mary that span multiple units. And so this kind of blanket, silos are everywhere, nobody can work together, really doesn't reflect what's going on at William & Mary.
Right, so what is it that's, that
Yes.
word is carrying?
Right, that needs to be
And
teased out and
tease out, absolutely, no question. Yes, this table here.
So we focused on, towards the bottom, the leadership development, mentoring, et cetera, and tie that to compensation, and particularly for William & Mary's lowest paid employees. We were talking about ways in which compensation, if expands beyond just paycheck and into other modes and forms of compensation that are really important in higher ed. For example, being able to take additional classes without free of charge, or thinking about mentoring, that having a formalized mentoring program. And then it also ties to retention, in the fact that you really want to be able to talk holistically about ways in which we are supporting our William & Mary faculty and staff, or our employees broadly, in really attracting more to the institution, like making it a place to stay.
Right.
To come and to
And
stay
if we're going to
want
be competitive as an
Right.
institution, this has to remain front of mind. And I'd add from that table back there, and as we're reminded also by one of our briefs, we need to be thinking about graduate compensation in that picture as well. Yeah. I will, to give credit for the last 5 years, I know this is something that has been front of mind and that we've made progress, and there is more to make. Yeah.
We also focused on the issue of compensation, not just that final point, but how compensation runs through a lot of the points on this page. It's obviously an aspect of the focus on faculty retention, part of the national trends of eroding tenure, because the calculations made about compensation inform the decisions about tenured and non-tenured positions. Also, point number 12, the need to define viable peers for realistic comparison. We see compensation underlying that as well. And the second point about the need for increased diversity of faculty and staff, because that's an issue of compensation too. We're losing faculty who contribute to the diversity of the campus here because we can't compensate them to compete with other schools.
So thanks also for that through line through multiple ones. Excellent. And we'll push that up explicitly. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to underscore the need for paying attention to the Arts Quarter. 2022, we're going to have a brand new front porch on Jamestown Road with new theater and music buildings, and we need to think about coordinating and collaborating now before we just stumble blindly into that space in a couple of years. I think we think there's extraordinary opportunity for collaboration, not only in our programs that we already present, but also in developing many more summer programs and entrepreneurial possibilities between the arts and management. We need more coordination with publicity and so forth, and we need the upper administration to be paying attention to this and providing a real leadership role while the arts are sort of scattered hither and yon.
In the diaspora
at the
now,
moment.
but soon to be arriving in the promised land.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And the potential for this, for advancement, for curriculum development, for entrepreneurial possibilities, as well as the curriculum, are all really important parts, I think, of our near future.
I really appreciate the metaphor front porch, because it's certainly something we are all, many of us, driving by, walking by, and waiting for as we look at those I-beams. And I also think that captures the way in which what we're talking about in this room is how do we make visible what's excellent here and the integration of fields that we think of as really powerful here. So front porch is a lovely metaphor to be thinking about as we go forward. Yep. So I'm just going to borrow it. Yes, other? Right over here. Yeah. I'm watching time because we have another really juicy one coming, so.
I'll just briefly add to second a lot of the things. One of the frames we lifted up across this was the idea of accessibility. And so there's physical accessibility, but also the idea of, is working here accessible to people based on compensation, respect, dignity? Is coming here as a learner accessible to students of diverse experiences? Is our sort of infrastructure and technology accessible? So that was the sort of systems word that came to us that became useful in thinking about a different approach than saying either or silos, but what's accessible and to whom.
And can I just add universal design in that? Because
You
that's
can.
the mechanism by which we get there.
Absolutely.
And that's a sustainability mechanism. You reduce the downstream needs to change your buildings, to change your curriculum, to change your technology when you start with a universal design set of principles. As many people know in this room, accessibility is one of those concepts that is increasingly being thought of in inclusion terms. And And the move in that field is to raise the surface level above which things are not accessible. And what it will mean, above all, is faculty and staff embracing changing how we do things. That's hard for us because you get settled in your own technology for your field, for your syllabus, for your classroom, but there are almost always technologies that and infrastructure that will help make all of what you're doing more accessible. So that's a culture change to say, I'm really interested in that universal design. I'm willing to commit the time to adjust forward, and it will make us way more successful as an organization to embrace that. This is true in multiple industries. So thank you.
I'm trying to put together three things that I don't know how they fit together, but compensation has been raised multiple times, in particular its connection to wellness and flourishing across campus. So on the one hand is the clear recognition of the need for better compensation for staff and some faculty, and also for graduate students and health insurance. On the same, at the same time, I remember very distinctly last year, Provost Halloran and Sam Jones multiple times giving talks about the very, very dire budget situation of William & Mary. And then at the same time is the high visibility of the campus renovations happening, right? The Alumni House, the Arts Quarter, William & Mary Hall, the Reevely Garden going in behind Washington Hall. And I guess what I'm trying to square is if we're taking seriously the need to do something concrete about compensation, and yet our budget situation feels very dire, and yet there's an enormous amount of renovation happening. I guess the question that I find myself asking is, what would it take for us to radically reimagine fundraising so that it could address some of the really key flourishing issues that we're trying to figure out?
Yeah, great question. This room knows, because you've all watched the video that we put up on the strategic planning website about Finance 101, you know that those funds are not fungible. You can't move them across. And that's true in terms of the funding from the Commonwealth as well. And that said, sustainability of all kinds, particularly gaining in renovations so that we don't need to do as many future renovations, is incredibly important, because it will allow us to be focusing on other things. We are blessed with a campus that has very little deferred maintenance compared to our peers. That's in the buildings that are academic buildings. And in our dorms, for example, we have a lot of deferred maintenance. And so there are multiple domains where meeting the needs of students, meeting accessibility needs, meeting inclusion needs is going to mean capital renovations. And yet, I think your point is really well taken, Rio, about how do we imagine forward programming as a continued robust part of philanthropy. Yep.
Want to reiterate, so it doesn't get lost, part of what Rio said, which is we do understand, of course, that money from one area that's been raised for one thing cannot be used for another. But what Rio said was to reimagine not just programming, but fundraising, so that the people who want to contribute to William & Mary's future can be directed to some of the crucial needs we have on campus that are going to be about our sustainability as the kind of public research university we want to be. When our undergraduate dorms do not have air conditioning, that's an accessibility issue for many people because of health. When the American Studies building is not accessible to people with limited mobility, so graduate students, for instance, who do not have mobility cannot take our courses. These are kinds of just sort of basic things which, yes, I understand the money isn't easily raised for that, but what Rio is suggesting is we start thinking in really creative ways about fundraising to direct our donors to really crucial things for the day-to-day life here for our students on campus.
And what I'm also hearing from you is look for the points of convergence, right, where program and space actually intersect and prioritize them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Katherine, could I add one? I thought Janice sent some really helpful language earlier about the notion of one of the things that may also be missing as someone who read all 45 white papers, it's far more than 90 pages. I'm not going to call out anyone who went over 2 pages, but and they were exceptionally written. But one of the tensions in it is earlier we talked about an adversity to profit-driven language. And among the most common words in all 45 of them is invest as a revenue-generating language. So I just want to acknowledge as one of the missing things sort of in our conversation as a community is the notion of the tension over resources exists on both sides of the equation. on how you generate them and how you spend them, and simply just acknowledging that as a tension in the room as well.
I think our table picked the last one also, but one of the things I would like us to challenge is when we talk about compensation, and don't get me wrong, we need more money. I'm the first one, right, Sam? But but can we start strategically looking at compensation in different ways? Does it always have to be revolved around money? Can we offer certain benefits? Can we do something for people's wellness? Or that when you look at studies, satisfaction is not always based on your salary. It's also based on your work environment and those things that keep you happy. Can we start strategically looking at compensation not just at dollars, but also at experiences at your job?
Right, and I think Chris Lee, our new CHRO, is thinking exactly in those terms. Yeah, so it's exciting. Who has not had a chance to have input? Any tables? Okay, so let's go to framing assumptions.
One more.
Oops, sorry. Sorry.
We
Brennan.
didn't talk this time. So I'll try not to harp too much on the information technology line, but I do want everyone to know that in all those papers, almost everything that's been suggested has some information technology piece to it. I don't want that to be forgotten as we're talking about other things, whether it's data, whether it's a research infrastructure, whatever it is, a improved business process, there's some information technology element. But I also want to underscore the facilities piece.
Yep.
Students have awful conditions in some dorms, no air conditioning. Some of the administrative buildings also have that. Even in our own building, we've had times this winter where we're working in 58-degree offices because the heat doesn't work, and it lasts more than one day. So, and the White House is on Jamestown Road. There's all those kinds of facilities. We really got to be thinking about those kind of fundamental issues to help with flourishing and help with the growth of our staff and faculty.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Super appreciated. We've gone fast through these. If you are a second-day responder, as I am, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night or tomorrow morning saying, I should have said this thing, and we would love to hear what that thing is. So please get those inputs, those processing moments, capture them, send them into our website, send them to President and this is a great moment to do that. Okay? But I do want to shift gears to first, our working definition of strategy, so that we're somewhat on the same page. And this was generated by the two committees working together jointly, the Strategic Planning Steering Committee and Cabinet, that are going to be developing strategy in phase 3 and bringing that back to you guys. So we've generated a set of framing assumptions that we're handing out right now, and they're linked online as well. And would like to spend the final portion of the day with you. So are you good with that definition, just as a working definition for now? We'd like to spend the final portion of the day. Here we go. This is the process we're in, continuing in. With these questions here, and then this is a draft document. Keep yourself thinking as you go forward, share it around, bring the feedback in so that we can keep these framing assumptions sharp. We're using them as a starting place. We need to be cognizant of them or address them as we develop strategy going forward that seizes the opportunities coming our way and addresses the significant challenges coming our way. These are generated from the white papers and the briefs in response. So quick work to get them here, but the dominant strains in the briefs and the white papers together. All right, so why don't you spend another 10 minutes talking together as a group about what you see here, and then bring us back what you think are the top 2 most urgent framing statements to address. this, and I do want to let you guys go at 5. So,
Catherine, while we're gathering it in, this will be a great time to reference that there's a wonderful website, wm.edu/strategic planning.
yes.
There are some tables at which folks might have watched an enrollment education module, which has everything you would ever want to know about national and in some ways international enrollment trends. There's also an exceptional video on Finance 101, which would be everything that you would need to know to have a basic understanding of William & Mary Finance. So those are other resources that are available anytime you'd like on wm.edu/strategic planning. It's a great website.
And all of the readings that the subcommittees building those white papers did are up there as well, and really fascinating stuff. Okay, so the first question here you do not have to answer right now because I'm not expecting you to have read all those readings for this conversation, but it is an invitation to you to go do those readings, and if you want to evaluate them and this set of assumptions, please, please do, okay? So I know there's a lot behind that, but we're interested in that peer review, critical feedback. What I'd really be interested in talking about is the next 2 bullets. First, what struck this room, your table, as the highest priority, most urgent framing assumption to address? And then second, are there any things missing that you'd really want to have as ways of naming dominant trends, opportunities, and challenges coming our way? Because that's what this is attempting to distill. You can think of this list as a charge to the plan itself. The plan ought to come back addressing these things in a way that's recognizable. If it doesn't, it ought to explain why. Okay? Yes, jump in.
We really resonated with the last point really resonated with us about William & Mary and its people, and I would say our people and not human effort.
Okay.
When I talk to people about what makes William & Mary special, I say it's people. And so many of the threads here about adequate compensation, about ability or accessibility, about that close human contact, it's all about those very personal connections that exist across campus. And I think that's going to make us effective at achieving our core mission. And so that, I think, is really probably is one of the most urgent statements. The other one we landed on is leading universities claim distinctive identities, signature areas of excellence, drive market awareness. But we added that what's missing now is the teacher-scholar model. There's no reference to the teacher-scholar model that we so value at William & Mary, and that is one of our distinctive identities. So we really think that needs to be made explicit in the framing assumptions.
Thanks. You hit both bullets like that. Other suggestions? Yep.
I'd like to start with an observation and then follow it up with an admission and then our ranking of the priorities. The first observation is that there seems to be a pretty strong division in these points between the top, so say 6 or so, that are about content and the actual mission that we would advocate, and the second half, which seems to be about process and implementation and leveraging of that vision. So I see this list as rather incommensurate in terms of what it's trying to achieve. The admission that we wanted to point out is on point 5. More than ever before, William & Mary students, faculty, staff, and alumni reflect our multifaceted and pluralistic democracy. We believe that there should be a should in there, that it should reflect our multifaceted and pluralistic democracy, that we have not achieved that goal as solidly as we might in the future. And then finally, we wanted to make a case for prioritizing the first point as being crucial to the vision that our institution develops.
Thanks.
I've got a mic.
Yeah.
So we'll need 2 people to report back on ours. I'll do the first part. One of the points that seems very important has to do with the mission of creating cultivating creative thinkers and principled leaders and compassionate global citizens. A lot of the conversations we have do look necessarily inward, and this is one of the few that asks us to think about what's the purpose of the university, our university in the world, and it pushes our vision outward. So I would very much like to have that be a priority in the next stages. And I think that my table mates agree, and now I'm going to pass the mic.
Guess it's me. The other part, the third and fourth from the bottom, the organizational infrastructure, we talked a little bit about how that encompasses culture, as well as the actual infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and that if we don't have those things in place, it'll be very hard to build on those for innovation.
Thank you. And I'm just going to remind us we have about 7 more minutes. So let's stay quick so we can keep the room having airspace. Yep.
A mic on, and I was nominated to summarize. So we cheated and did it like this. First, the deep human connection struck us all as a really important framing principle, and we think people don't know us well enough to know how well we do that, which meant that we then sort of combined a few points to make a second one. We really think we've got to do that personal connection messaging by looking outward, as Teresa was saying a second ago, by demonstrating the success of a William and Mary education to external audiences, and by therefore being able to deal with the decreasing population of high school graduates. In other words, we really can't see those as separate. I mean, if we're going to succeed in competing in this new competitive landscape, we have to get the whole world and nation to know that we have deeply meaningful human connections in our teaching, learning, alumni engagement, and the rest. That was one, and the second was we need to save the planet, so sustainability.
Okay, that's great. I love how you strung them together. You're jumping ahead for the 2 joint committees' work, and I will say, I love the reading of the different modalities of this list too. This is just a grab bag list, but they're clearly cohering in modalities in a really interesting way, so thank you for that. Yes?
Okay, our group was kind of fixated on the compensation issue, and we talked about that and tied that into wellness. One thing we also talked about was tying number 6 to number 12. The fact is this demographic cliff might be alleviated by lifelong learning, that we need more innovative summer school offerings. Cornell does an alumni college, which is a big revenue generator. I'm an alum, so I hear about it all the time. Princeton has, where I'm also an alum, has incredible programs aimed at alumni and getting them, back to campus and around the world, and these could be real revenue-generating opportunities for William and Mary.
Thank you. I will say Faculty Assembly had that on their agenda the very first meeting I had with them too as well, so give them cred. Other hands up, other tables, top priority.
Been nominated here. Echoing other colleagues in the room, we went with points 1 and 8. 1, focusing on a boundary transcending education. We really liked the emphasis on citizens here, preparing our students as citizens and global citizens, as well as professionals. We think it's important to emphasize that. And then again, the idea of focusing on our distinctive identity to celebrate the strengths that we have already in place.
We thought we were very special because we were going to combine lots of different bullet points. But now we see we're not special at all. So we focused, actually we also focused on thinking about the externally facing parts of the framing assumptions. And we connected the decreasing population of high school graduates bullet point near the bottom with the bullet point that talks about the strength and vitality that would come from the diversity advanced via demographic change. And we then linked that to deep human connections and to effectively communicating the value of a William and Mary education, because we felt they were all really tied up together, that changing demographics are linked to diversity and equity, which are linked to communicating effectively to broader and more diverse
divergent audiences than we have so far. And finally, that in order to embrace those diverse populations on campus, the best way to approach that is through really deep human connections. And we actually felt that in that bullet point there was one missing.
Which one is that?
Sorry, the second one, deep human connections,
Yep.
Hallmark William and Mary. That the examples of that are applied student learning, mentored research, and alumni engagement. But of course, there are also very deep human connections between staff and students, staff and faculty, and within all those groups too.
I'm going to try to capture that.
This was the last hand I saw. Because we're tight on time, if you would like to speak, don't be bashful. Make sure you make eye contact so that we can get to you. You were the last.
Yep.
I have to admit that our table didn't follow the assignment, and we did not identify.
Wait, I'm shocked.
But we did talk about things on this sheet with a focus on the question of the declining population of high school students creating crises for William & Mary and other universities in the future. And I would just like to tie that to my own thought about what some of the important bullet points here are, which reflect things other tables have said, but obviously enhancing what it is that William & Mary's distinctive identity and brand is out there will help us as we need to continue to compete for students. But also back to the point made earlier about diversity. And if William & Mary could actually become a place where our diversity is one of our strengths, then that could help also if we get to that place where we are not getting enough applicants to compete in the world as an institution which actually offers a very diverse faculty and student body for a reasonable price.
Thank you. That was, I hope someone recorded that because it was very beautifully put. Any other readouts for the tables? Couple things are really helpful here. The degree to which, coming from very different disciplines, roles, perspectives on this, and having gone through seriously 2 domains of disagreement or what's missing, there's still a high degree of connectivity through these statements that this room is finding and perceiving. And I'm surprised by that, and I'm actually really grateful for that, for hearing you processing that synthesis. I would like to continue to ask you next couple of weeks as you process this and as you talk about it with colleagues, please do. Please continue to send your feedback in, okay? And I will remind you just in closing, because I'm being reminded to do that by our MC, that we do have this goes back to the observation of some content and some process goals in the set. We do have both process and content goals. These are the content goals, but there are 2 process ones that go with them as well. And I think that might be why you're seeing a drive towards 2 modalities of framing assumptions. I want to add one more thing about that the externally facing thread that's running through many of these comments is also, I think, highlighting that this plan ought to be addressing those dominant trends and looking outward. And that is relatively unusual in higher ed. Usually we look inward and take stock of ourselves. We've tried to do both. We've split the difference between them in this one, and that we're looking intentionally at the most significant opportunities and challenges so that we can achieve many of the aspirations that we've just described here today. So it's going to be a problem-solving, problem-tackling plan that I'm coming to understand as I listen to this room. I don't think I've said it exactly that way before, but that's how I think we need to be working right now to ensure that we are working at the kind of place we aspire to be, which you have really powerfully articulated today. So thank you for that. Keep the inputs coming and come back at our next forum, April 8th, and we'll let you know how much further we've gotten. Somebody, you're pointing? And thank you so much for those patient folks who were following the live stream. We would love your input and feedback as well, particularly on this last set of draft framing assumptions. And they are draft. Hopefully by April 8th, we will sharpen them with the feedback here today and what else you send in to us. Thank you so much. And have a great spring break. All right?
Thank you.
If you made great notes on a sheet of paper on your table, if you leave them, we do take and read all of the notes that are left on the table. So if you left something particularly well worded, please leave it and share it with us.